This is Infosec Decoded, number 65, with Robotaxis. But the first thing I want to talk about is offensive Rust. My career making CTF started with a book called Violent Python, which was awesome. And this guy has started writing offensive tools in Rust for Windows, which are intended to be cross-compiled from Linux. And I wondered if I wanted to teach this stuff. It looks a little bit advanced, but not bad. All kinds of cool Windows things, get debug privileges, um, inject shell code, and so on. So he has a whole bunch of offensive Rust tools. So I'm going to have to look through that and see what's cool to throw into the Rust projects. But
So, so
yeah,
you use Linux to build these Windows tools and
yes,
let them loose. That actually sounds like a great way to learn Rust.
yeah. I mean, the great way to learn anything is to write offensive tools. And I wrote a few Rust projects, but they're pretty much defensive. And Kaitlyn started writing some offensive stuff, and it's pretty hard in Rust. So more examples of good offensive stuff in Rust is very good, I think.
I'm gonna
Yeah, I
add
mean,
this.
I Rust is great, but it's still not 1.0 ready, I found. So I would love to do more stuff in Rust, but they really need to kind of mature it a bit before I'm willing to jump on board.
Yeah, yeah. But if you're writing attack tools, the details don't matter much.
Actually, it kind of does. The last attack tool I wrote with Rust
Mm-hmm.
failed because the libraries weren't really mature enough to handle what I was doing. So
Oh, well, that's annoying. Yeah. All right. Well, then we'll go to Kaitlyn that has a toxic workplace.
yeah, so Blue Origin, who is suing NASA and trying to tie up our entire space industry, our space exploration, tie up the hopes and dreams of millions of Americans and children. It turns out, shockingly, that their workplace is toxic. So
Elon Musk, like yesterday, interviewed at Code. He said, he's got to stop with all the stupid lawsuits. What's wrong with this guy anyway?
yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure that Elon Musk should be lecturing others on lawsuits, but
That was his response. He published a list of like all the lawsuits SpaceX made.
yeah, yeah. But yeah, no, but definitely Jeff. Blue Origin is definitely on a lot of people's poo-poo list right now because of what they've done about how they're so okay. So we've covered this before on the podcast, but essentially what happened is that Blue Origin was competing for contracts to go to the moon, and their rockets weren't ready. They didn't really have much. I mean, they had something to show, but it wasn't the best. But NASA decided the contractor that they were going to use was going to be SpaceX. And keep in mind, this is nothing new. NASA has been using contractors since age immortal. I mean, it's just what NASA does. NASA uses outside contractors. But what's interesting is that when they didn't get picked, Blue Origin sued NASA. and
But SpaceX's product is just way ahead, right? Way superior.
it is. Like I said, I really think NASA made a good decision. I don't know why anyone would choose Blue Origin for the moon, but
Yeah.
um, so yeah, Blue Origin sued and is like tying up the entire space mission to go to the moon and like tying up our space exploration program because they want the money.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, I mean, the thing is when you work at NASA, you kind of take a pay cut, right? Like the astronauts, as much as they are heroes, aren't making millions of dollars going to space. they're
Well,
making
yeah.
they're making as much as you could be expected to make from a civil servant.
Right. It's
Yeah,
government work. That's true of all government work.
yeah, it's government work. It's you do it because you believe in the mission, not for the money. And of course, people love government contracts and whatnot. But this is, NASA is all about the mission, all about putting our hopes and dreams on the stars, doing the public good. And to have grifters come along like Blue Origin and sue NASA, that was bad. Anyway, back to the story. So yeah, toxic workplace. Who would have thought? Supposedly, there's a lot of sexism and harassment that goes on at Blue Origin. Particularly a lot of sexism. Like one of the things at NASA is that they're very big on having a history of inclusion. There have been several documentaries about Hidden Figures. historically, so NASA's been really big about, oh, hey, we need to find people who are, not well represented, and get them in and just find good talent, because we're not in this to make money. We're in this to, show off the best of humanity.
Mhm.
And if you're the best of the best, we want you. We don't care if you're, we don't care about your background. Just, can you do the work that you need to do? And I was always been big on NASA. So the fact that Blue Origin also has a lot of sexual harassment is, not, it makes them even less appealing to NASA. I mean, NASA wants nothing to do with that. So,
But NASA, being government work, I imagine they really, really care if you smoke pot. That's usually the problem.
that's the one thing about the government work, is that it is tied to the military.
Yep.
You do have secrets. You are working with ITAR, so NASA really does care about your character, which can be a bit Puritan at times, admittedly. But as long as go on.
So this caught my attention because FEMA, a FEMA security director, took my classes, and he was talking to all the other students. You could totally get a job at FEMA. And they said, but I'd have to quit smoking pot, and that's a deal breaker. Many of my students said that, and I'm like,
yes,
dude, I really don't feel that way. I think a job is more important, but I guess I'm an old style Puritan.
A lot of people who like pot really like pot. And I don't judge them. Everyone has their things that make them happy, and that's fine. But for whatever reason, just because you're working with very sensitive information, just like any sort of classified job, you can't have, an addiction to drugs, a history of like alcohol abuse, stuff like that.
You can be a blackout drunk and cheating on your wife, and that's fine in the military. I don't know if it's still true.
I think if you are blackout drunk,
Yeah.
and showing signs of odd behavior at work, and you have a security clearance, that would get flagged to the FBI. Actually, I think that would not be okay.
I would hope so.
Yes. But definitely, pot use, stuff like that. That's, there is sort of a Puritan attitude at NASA and at the government in general. But that has to do with security clearance, not. Yeah. I don't think anyone really cares if you do pot.
Well, but logically, it's still a felony on the federal laws, and it is a federal job. So
yes,
they kind of really can't look the other way at breaking federal laws.
They cannot. But like I said, the big thing, of course, is just keeping the ITAR secret safe at NASA, which is
ITAR.
The international trade and arms agreement stuff. So like if you're working on rockets and you have like designs that are top secret or secret, you're not, that's called ITAR data. And they don't like that being shared with with people that would use it against us for some reason. I don't.
Yeah, apparently they wouldn't like it if you just went and gave an ordinary cryptocurrency talk in North Korea either. They'd get all hot and bothered about that.
Yeah. That's very serious. The government really takes that seriously. And the thing is, in security, we always learn that the worst thing you can do is security through obscurity. And yet that's a lot of our secrets model in the government, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, Bruce Shire said that's really all you ever have is security through obscurity.
Well, not in the case of good encryption.
I would think not. Anyway, so I'm not too surprised by this toxic workplace. As far as I can tell, all these tech billionaires are pretty much sexist pigs that think they can just use women and throw them away. That seems to kind of go with the territory.
Yeah, especially since these are pet projects of billionaires and not just, their original gig or whatever. Yeah, this doesn't surprise me at all. Like I said, it's just Blue Origin has pinged itself as someone you don't want to work with. So
yeah. All right. And so Irvin has got the #1 search query on Bing. I wonder what it is.
Right. Google is battling antitrust regulators in the EU. And part of their argument that, hey, we're not evil is, hey, if you look at Bing, our competitor, what is their #1 search? It's us. That's not by our doing. Just we're better, so people use that to get to us.
And of course, the only reason they're using Bing is because Microsoft slams you into Bing when you install Windows, and nobody actually wants Bing, so all they do is use Bing to find Google.
Yep, that's exactly the argument that they're saying.
They're probably right about all that. remember we talked about this earlier. The first thing I think is the only thing I ever use Internet Explorer for is to download Firefox.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also, I think, probably they could do the same question there. What is the number one thing people do with Internet Explorer? It's probably downloading Firefox or Chrome.
Yep. Yep. That's exactly right. So that was the hilarious argument that came out as Google continues to fight a $5 billion fine.
Well, remember when Bing was new, Microsoft actually put up a page where you'd have Bing on one side and Google on the other and said, we're going to see how good it is. And like 80% of everybody preferred the Google page.
Yep.
But this is the thing I've always known about Microsoft. It's a cult. They really believe this weird, stupid stuff, and you have to, or you'll get fired. So they're like hypnotized into worshiping their products and thinking that they're wonderful and everything else is inferior. Like I remember there was a study that if you worked at, or there was an insider leak that if you worked at Microsoft and you had an iPod, when Bill Gates goes by, you had to hide it and pretend you were listening to a Zune, because they wouldn't want anyone being disloyal and using any non-Microsoft anything. And you had to pretend that their inferior Microsoft products were better. And Bill Gates wouldn't let his family use iPhones or iPods. They had to use the inferior Microsoft devices, which they didn't want to use. And I was interested to read that because this is a fundamental moral problem. When you do not want to know the truth about your stuff, you want to force the people around you to lie and tell you it's good when it's not good. Mm-hmm. That's a really a bad place to be. You know, I would think it would be very useful for your people like your family to tell you what really is the better product. That's like a focus group.
Yeah.
But they just want to be flattered. They don't want to hear the truth. Anyway.
Anywho.
Yeah, it's a fun one. All right. And Alan says every nation has an exploitation program.
This according to Rob Joyce, who is director of cybersecurity at the NSA, no less. He was speaking at the Aspen Cyber Summit in Aspen, Colorado, and he had a number of comments on the offensive capabilities of the big four, namely Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. But the biggest comment, at least in my mind, is his remark that, quote, almost every nation in the world now has a cyber exploitation program.
Yeah.
Which is really, really interesting. I don't know what a cyber exploitation program is exactly. It sounds to me like offensive cyber capabilities, but I'm just going to say that it's some kind of offensive cyber capabilities. But the fact that almost every country in the world, including presumably lower income countries, now have some kind of offensive cyber capabilities is surprising.
No, I would think especially low income countries that can't afford stuff like nuclear weapons, because it's
not
cheap.
only can't afford nuclear weapons, but might not really have a full military. You know,
Right.
they've got infantry, but they don't really have an air force.
But it's so cheap. I remember the Syrian Electronic Army that hacked the New York Times and everybody was one 17-year-old kid that liked Assad. I mean, it's cheap and easy to have an offensive cyber capability.
Yeah, but that was just one kid acting on his own, as far as I know, at least initially.
Well, but I think that he became the official.
Yeah, maybe he was promoted.
Yeah.
Shortly thereafter.
Well, I think that's what you do. You just partner with your local criminal hackers, just sort of like making a deal with the mafia. That's the easy way to do it.
Yeah. And I guess governments have figured this out, and they've recruited somehow, either through formal education channels or through just cracking down and catching the local miscreants, online miscreants.
Yeah, well, it's not that different than like terrorism. It's asymmetrical warfare, how the weak can attack the strong.
Yes.
And I mean, there's a lot of really inventive, deadly hackers in like Iran and Mexico and stuff. And I think another thing is if you are in these poor countries, you get used to making do with old crappy versions of things. You pretty much become a hacker just by force. In addition, of course, you have to pirate all the software because you can't afford to buy it. So actually, it seems very logical to me.
If anything, it's much better preparation than growing up in the US.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I remember there was in Central America, the local peasants got discarded dishes from dish antennas, and they used them to send signals up to American spy satellites and bounce them off the repeaters, and you make cell phones out of it. So, I think Americans have this sort of a elitist idea that we're the only ones smart enough to twist and abuse technology, but that is emphatically not true. These poor, uneducated people in small countries can be quite inventive at hacking stuff with their gadgets.
Yeah, human ingenuity is universal.
Yeah.
But if you spend much time outside of the US, you come to realize how, as you were saying, Americans seem to have this notion that they're the smartest people on earth, and how very untrue that is.
In a way, I would think we might be the dumbest because we're so rich we can afford to buy luxurious gadgets that are automatic instead of having to figure out how to do it with discarded trash.
Well, that's entirely true. Yes, if you are in a wealthy country, you don't have to be smart.
Yeah.
You can get away with being dumb, and that does seem to have happened.
Yeah, one of the great tragedies of the modern age is that somewhere we have the next Einstein or the next genius sitting somewhere in a gutter trying to find food that they can't eat right now because they're just too poor.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I think it also applies to things like not bothering to vaccinate most of the earth because they're in India or Africa or something. I mean, that's why I think the diversity people have a very strong case when they say that, by being bigoted, you are discarding most of the valuable talent. Yeah. All right. And Liz is gone for some reason, but I always try to be charitable. And when people don't show up, I assume it's just rehab or a felony conviction or something. But anyway, for somehow she's not here. So I've got the Commando VM, which is something I've seen before. Somebody was tweeting about it now, but I really think I should check this out. I've used Kali. Back when I used to teach the offensive pen testing course that I haven't for a few years, I used Kali as the attack tool, but this is the FireEye attack tool, and it really looks good. Now I'm taking a better look at it. It goes on Windows, puts on this stuff with chocolatey, and it gives you a whole bunch of attack tools that I did not know about. Really dozens of them, just like Kali, but they're all Windows-based attack tools intending to attack Windows. So I'm thinking I should really got to check this out because now I'm having to write a lot of malware from my incident response class, and I'm writing pretty lame, simple malware, and learning how to use these tools. I could probably do a better job of making attacks to like practice cheating if you can pick them up with Splunk and Sysmon and stuff. There's just a lot of good stuff in here. A lot of PowerShell attacks, Powerless Shell, and PS AMC and PS attack. Just lots of good stuff. Evil Clippy. I don't know any of these attacks, and I really think I should learn. Anyway, that's going to be the next toy to play with, Commando VM. And Kaitlyn has got, oh yeah, the one where the baby died.
Yeah, I mean,
hit the press
yeah. So content warning, people. This is pretty bad. Threat Post has an article about written by Lisa Voss, talking about how there was a ransomware attack back in 2019 with the Ryuk, a ransomware, and it kept the doctors from having access to the baby's heart monitors, and basically because they couldn't monitor the baby's oxygen level, the baby ended up dying because there was ransomware on their machines that was being used to keep the baby alive. I mean, and that's really the full story.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I bet a lot more people have died than this. It's just that you can't tie it directly to the failure of the computer systems.
Right.
But they kept the hospital open and continued serving patients, even though all their computer systems were down, and they had some makeshift attempt to do everything with clipboards, which was not working very well.
No.
So you could argue that they should have closed the place.
I mean, and then where would they have gone? I mean, this was a newborn baby. They couldn't, I don't know if it would have even been possible to transport it in time to get it, and doctors should be able to work in an emergency situation with the computers being down. Even if it's not a ransomware attack, it might be a massive power outage, or who knows. Even though hospitals do have big backup generators and batteries and stuff, but that's just worst case scenario. Doctors need to be able to work in any situation. But of course, this was avoidable, which is what makes it really tragic. And that, these ransomware people, it's not just about getting rich. It's not just an annoyance. This stuff costs lives, and it needs to end.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I don't know if it's all that avoidable. We're trying to find a solution, and there isn't much of a solution at hand. And right now we have this situation in many hospitals in America. I've been hearing a lot of podcasts about it, how right now the number of COVID patients is so large that they are in the same situation where everybody is stretched and they're trying to handle 2 or 3 times as many patients as usual. And they say they know that means I'm not able to monitor the alerts so carefully. So I'm sure people are dying right now in similar circumstances because of the people that don't get vaccinated.
Yeah.
It's and they said, a few states have actually switched to crisis standards of care so they can officially start triaging people. But they say even the ones that haven't officially switched, in fact, the fact is if you go to the hospital now, you are going to get substandard care,
right?
Because they are being swamped. So, yeah. Anyway, this one got a lot of attention, and a lot of people said this happened a few times in Europe too. But this is supposedly the first one from 2019. Yeah. Anyway, then, all right, Irvin's got the disappearing computer. What is this?
I think for Amazon being all weird, I think this idea is actually a good one. What essentially what they're doing is they're getting rid of that layer of the operating system. It's obviously all their devices need an OS to run, just like anything else, but their emphasis is more on the user interface, so that the user doesn't have to think about the underlying OS.
So this would be like voice control, like Captain Kirk, right?
Yeah, where you don't know what kind of machine is in the background, you don't know what software is running to make all that happen. That has become that's disappeared because you don't think about it anymore.
I haven't noticed this happening. I'm still typing all day to control my computer.
Oh, yeah, we are. That's what we do. But that's where Amazon is taking their toys. Is having this one uniform platform that everything works on everything, and the user doesn't think about anything that's underlying.
Well, I guess people have these smart speakers they talk to.
Yeah.
Are people actually finding they can do all the computing they need by just talking to the device? I wouldn't think so.
I wouldn't think so either. But
yeah.
But that's Amazon's goal, is that you can.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a fair goal. I think that's certainly true. Yeah, I've heard that people, young kids today cannot write with a pen on paper. They've never done that. All they've ever done is type.
They don't know how to do cursive.
Yep.
Well, that's a good thing. Cursive. Yeah, one of the things I learned after being very good at cursive for a long time is I should stop using cursive.
Well, yeah, it's pretty hard to read and pretty hard to write. I never liked it much. But yeah. Well, I know another thing is they said this picture of a floppy disk people click on, people have no idea what that is. You click on this thing to save it, but I have no idea what that drawing is supposed to be. It looks kind of like a house. What is that weird thing?
Yep.
Well, makes sense. All right. And Alan has got Malwarebytes.
Yes, Malwarebytes has published a report called Demographics of Cybercrime. And one, of course, should always be a little suspicious of reports coming from commercial entities, reports that probably serve to further their own commercial interests.
Well, that's the thing I was going to say. Malwarebytes has a lot of good research, but in fact, I tell everybody with a Mac that puts that on that it's junk and they should take it off. The product is pretty much malware itself.
Yeah, but I will say that in this case, this particular survey is interesting because it appears to be asking the question that no one else has, which is, are there demographic differences in the effect of cybercrime on individuals? I'm not aware of any other research, academic research, that has looked at how cybercrime might affect different groups differently. And in fact, according to this report from Malwarebytes, there are significant differences in how malware, or cybercrime, I should say, cybercrime affects different groups, demographic groups.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah.
And some of the big takeaways from this survey include the fact that half of all respondents do not feel private online. So clearly,
They're right. That means
there's a
they're
trust
smart.
issue there, and it really should be 100%, but at least half of them got the message.
Yeah.
And that 31% of respondents do not feel safe online. Again, that's much lower than it should be. But more specifically, women in general feel less safe online than men. And that's 35% compared to 27% for men.
Yeah.
And 46% of women said that they had their social media accounts hacked. 46% versus 37% for men.
Those numbers are
and
both pretty high.
Yeah, both very, very high. And I'm not sure how they were defining this social media account getting hacked, but credentials stolen, presumably.
Phishing, maybe.
Yeah, maybe phishing, yeah. And in particular, Black, Indigenous, and people of color had the lowest rate of avoiding financial impact due to cyber crime. So in other words, they suffered greater financial impacts from cyber crime. So white respondents had a much lower rate by 12% that were unaffected versus only 47% of Black, Indigenous, people of color avoided some kind of financial impact. And in particular, women and Black, Indigenous, people of color respondents experienced substantial stress when dealing with suspicious online activity. So this really does raise some interesting questions about perhaps targeting. Certain people, certain groups get targeted online more, and then the consequences of this. And of course, Malwarebytes' solution in this report is to say, well, everyone should install antivirus, and more specifically should install Malwarebytes antivirus.
Yeah.
Which is a rather naive approach to addressing these problems.
Which I don't think would fix any of the problems you mentioned. It wouldn't stop your social media from getting hacked. It wouldn't stop financial crime that tricks you.
Right. Aside from possibly getting rid of keyloggers and maybe preventing you from going to
Known phishing sites.
Very fishy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really cannot be addressed by antivirus at all.
Yeah. Well, anyway, like you say, they actually do have a lot of interesting research for a company that seems to be wholly evil otherwise. I don't get it anyway. But I'm sure there's huge racial differences. One thing I've noticed is that there is a Black Twitter community that occasionally send me tweets, and they've got a lot of slang and a special language. I can't understand what's going on. There's clearly a whole culture, ethnically based there, sort of like a neighborhood of town where stuff is going on that I can't follow. And I'm sure they have different crimes going on there and different expectations.
Well, one last thing I should say about this study is that it is an international study. Respondents were from the US, the UK, and Germany, but that's only 3 countries and hardly representative of the world. And it was run by one of these online survey platforms in which the respondents were paid, and I don't know how they recruited them. And also the report does not include the raw statistics, the raw numbers, the raw data, nor does it include the actual questions that were used in this. So there are a lot of caveats, and it would be very interesting to have a proper academic study looking at these very questions.
Yeah, that reminds me of another article I saw a week ago where a bunch of social scientists are complaining because there's some website where you can put up a survey and people earn like, 50 cents for taking the survey.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
And some teenager made a TikTok about, hey, you can make money by taking all these surveys. And it went viral. So suddenly thousands of these teenage girls were taking all the surveys, and all these researchers said, it's skewing our findings. We used to have like only 20% teenage girls. Now it's 90% teenage girls all at once. Why is this happening? So apparently they were not doing any controls. They were just taking whoever came in and then hoping it was a random sample. So that highly makes me suspicious of their work.
Yeah. Although apparently shortly thereafter, the teenagers all left the platform. So,
well, sure, that's like most of these crazes, they hit for a while and then they're out of fashion.
Yeah.
But it does show that it makes you worry about research. I know before this, almost all research was done with college students. You would make your students in your class take the survey. And a lot of medical
problem with just about every psychology study.
Yeah, and a lot of medical studies too. In fact, one huge thing in medical studies is that almost all medicine is tested only on men, and they don't test enough of it on women. But yeah, anyways, it certainly is a big issue that you don't really, different communities are using things differently, and you have to be careful to measure that. Anyway, I saw this one, Earth is dimming, which is, one thing that came out about a month ago is that the rate of global warming is much bigger than even the worst case. That's why people are really freaking out and panicking. They're saying, we thought we had like 20 or 30 years. In fact, we're already at the 1.5 degree mark and going up really fast. And they said something was wrong in our predictions. And I wonder if this is it. Maybe they thought of this, but there was a belief that when the Earth warmed, the oceans would evaporate more and it would make more clouds, reflecting more sunlight. And it is the opposite. For some reason, the Earth warming means less clouds of the type that reflect sunlight. And they measured the albedo. They've been measuring it for years. They got a graph here that goes back to 2000 or so. They've been measuring the amount of Earth light that is reflected off the moon. So the sun hits the Earth and it bounces off the moon, and measuring the moonshine, and it falls a lot. And it falls a lot more rapidly in the last few years. So the Earth is now much less reflective than it used to be. So it is absorbing more heat from the sun. And this is not a small effect. They say this is enough to explain a large portion of the global warming we've been observing. So it's a positive feedback effect. And that's quite important. And we'll see what comes of this. I know some of the proposals, I think we're really going to have to look seriously at things to reflect the sunlight away, artificial attempts to cool the Earth now. I think our attempt to hold back the CO2 growing in the air has failed. And our attempt to suck the CO2 back out of the air, we're totally not ready for that. So people have proposed things that would terraform Earth. And one of the proposals is to shoot like metallic dust way up high in the atmosphere to stimulate more clouds up high to reflect the sunlight. And we might be down to that. That and dumping iron filings in the ocean to suck up a lot of CO2. These are where you now put up a different kind of pollution to try to compensate for the first kind of pollution. And I think we're going to really have to start doing that because we really need to act fast. And I think all our other plans to change our power plants and stop burning coal and everything are not going to happen fast enough.
Yeah, I was just thinking the same thing, that we put so much of our energy into finding alternatives to fossil fuels. And I think it's time to really start putting a lot of our energy now into, because that has not been working as well as we wanted. It's now time to start putting a lot of effort into things like carbon capture.
Well, yeah, but carbon capture, the only kind of carbon capture that even is remotely affordable and effective is to catch it in the smokestack of the plant. Once it's out and smeared around everywhere, trying to suck it out of the air at a concentration of a few hundred parts per billion is just so inefficient. I don't think in a decade we can possibly get any carbon capture technology running at a scale that would make a difference.
Maybe not, but it's definitely, it's at this point, like I said, we really need to work on triaging the situation and creating technologies to reduce carbon emissions. It's a little too late at this point.
Yeah, that's the right thing to do to help in 20 years. But our immediate need is to do something to cool the Earth now. And that would be involving adding more pollution. Just like when you're taking chemotherapy, you take another drug to kill the nausea.
Right. Or what we can do is we can dump a giant ice cube in the ocean every year.
If we had one, you'd have to get like a ice satellite. I know I wondered, we were talking a few podcasts ago about the asteroid that is like a million tons of gold. It seems like you would just go grab that thing and bring it down and be rich.
And completely crash the economy while you're at it.
Well, you could tell yourself that we will be like disciplined and put it in Fort Knox and only dole it out. But but I mean, I would think somebody like Elon Musk would totally do that. I mean, anyway, but we certainly need to do something drastic to cool the planet, I think.
Yeah, the time for personal responsibility and legislating the companies is quickly passing. We need to start really move from prevention to active care. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, recycling your trash and riding the bus is not going to do it. Yeah. All right. Anyway, so you got new USB labels.
Yes, finally. So this has been a complaint of mine ever since USBC came out. So the idea behind USBC, and this goes back to your thing, Sam, where if you come out with you have all these confusing standards, so you come out with another one to fix it. Now you have another confusing standard on top of it, and that's exactly what happened to USBC. So PC World has an article by Gordon Ung talking about the new USB cable certification program. So what's the problem? Well, we came out with a port that does everything, and it turns out that's not as awesome as it sounds at first glance. Because it turns out when you have a port that's, for example, made for video or data transfer, the cables are therefore made for video or data transfer. If you have ports for power transfer, you have cables designed for power transfer. But when you have both a port that's designed for like power transfer, data, video, whatever, then it turns out that some cables will be really good at power, some cables will be really good at data, and you kind of don't know which is which, and it became a big mess really quickly. So finally, years later, it looks like the USB standards groups, I guess this is part of the IEEE, are trying to put labels on cables themselves, saying what kind of cables these are. So you have the three that are mentioned here is a 40 gigabits per second USB cable. So that's for data. So, if you pick up a 40 gigabit per second cable, that's good for your hard drives and stuff. They also have a 240 watt label for cables, which would be good for charging. And they also have a combined cable of 40 gigabits per second, 240 watts. So you can tell, I can use this for everything, as well as a certified USB charger for packaging. So if you want to know if your cable is good for charging, you know on the box.
So if you use the data cable for charging, does it set fire to your house?
I don't think it'll set fire to the house. It definitely, there's going to be too much resistance on the line. So here's the thing. When you transfer power, you kind of need thicker, more expensive cables because the amount of current that passes through will depend on the gauge of the wire. So if you have a very like a 10 AWG cable, which should be fine for data and small and is very in keeping with modern trends of making everything light and sleek. That's not going to handle much power, but it can handle like 500 milliwatts, whatever. That's fine. 500 milliamps. I'm sorry, of power. It can do that. But when you're trying to charge a larger device like a tablet or a laptop, you need thicker cables because you're going to be pushing through much more current. And so you need thicker cables. But of course, that doesn't necessarily mean that your data transfer is going to be very good, because data transfer requires a different set of requirements, mostly interference avoidance. So you want like shorter length cables that are properly shielded, that are wire wraps together in twisted pairs correctly and everything. And then that too is a big dealy boob, making sure that there's as little interference as possible to get the data rate as high as possible. So you have two different types of cables that you could really make. And it is possible to make one cable that does it both. Don't get me wrong, it's just very expensive, which is, so hopefully this will end some of the confusion. So people will know when they pick up a cable, whether it'll be good for data or for power.
So how are they going to mark them? Because I know in fiber optics, we have this problem, and they just adopted color codes, orange for multi-mode, yellow for single mode. That would be one way to go.
So they're going to put logos on the ends of the cables.
little tiny logos you can't see.
Exactly. So you put them under a microscope, then you can see what's going on. So perfect, problem solved.
I would have preferred to have color codes. That works pretty well in fiber optics.
Yeah, color codes would be nice too, except, I mean, I'd worry about future proofing, because right now we can say 240 watts for USB-C, but if like USB 5.0 comes out and we say we're going to up it to 360 watts, because already there are a few laptops that exceed 240 watts of power.
Well, then it's even more important to make sure you don't grab the wrong cable. I'm still for color codes.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, it's not going to burn everything down if you grab the wrong cable. But
okay.
Yeah, no, I agree too. I think color codes would be a good idea. Logos are at least an improvement, because right now there's nothing. You have no way of telling if your cable is good or not for what it's doing, which is worse than what we had previously, which is just a bunch of different ports. And people were complaining, why don't we have this one port? Well, this is why.
Well, yeah, I mean, if it actually has to be a different cable, it would probably be good if it had a different end, so you just physically can't use it in the wrong case.
Exactly. Makes sense. But this was a grand experiment, and it was, it sounds good on paper, but in practice, you really do, your cables need to be designed for the purpose that they're trying to accomplish. So.
Yeah, this is why the EU passing a rule that everything has to be USB-C. Maybe they didn't think that through.
Well, hopefully, like I said, now they're putting these logos on the cables. This will be a huge help.
Yeah, maybe. All right. And so Irvin has a bad boss.
Yes, actually, but so this article is specifically on just pointing out that employees are just, it doesn't work to micromanage. That keeping the bosses keeping their nose, they're just watching every little thing that the employees are doing. It doesn't breed a productive environment where they create, where they're free to create.
A lot of people love it though, and now they have all this software, right, to monitor everything you do.
Right. All of that just makes people more stressed out. It makes them hate where they're working, rather than giving them the freedom to create and do.
I remember 30 years ago, I saw a survey that said that when they interviewed bosses, like 90% of them said the employees are a bunch of lazy bums that would rather do nothing, and my real job is to somehow catch them and like make them work and force them to work. When they interviewed employees, 90% of them said, my best day is when I show up for work and everything's ready to go and I can get something done. And I really hate it when I can't proceed. And it's not like I need the boss to like make me work. I just need the boss to remove the obstacles that are in my way so I can have a good day and get work done.
Mm-hmm.
And, but that was 30 years ago. I guess this hasn't really percolated through management culture yet, but.
No, I don't think it has.
No, but I think it's the same thing with our students, right? I think there are some teachers that see themselves as like poking and prodding and kicking their students along, but I find it a lot better to just remove the obstacles so the students can learn something. They came here to learn something, at least in my classes. I mean, there's people who are like forced to take some required class they hate, and I guess it's a different story there. But when you're teaching hacking, then the people are there because they want to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And they just want you to like give them the right tools and remove the obstacles so they can do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Anyway, all right. And Alan has Robotaxis. I thought this is great. I made it the title.
Robotaxis. Yes. If you happen to see a Waymo or Cruise vehicle in California, you may want to give it extra distance, because the California Department of Motor Vehicles just issued permits to those two countries or companies.
You regard it as more dangerous than a human?
Well,
I have the opposite feeling.
I don't know. I've seen them driving around San Francisco, and their driving behavior is rather erratic at times.
Oh.
So, yes. Now, of course, they have been driving around the city and the state for years now. This is not new. But these permits that have been issued by the California DMV allows the two companies to charge passengers, as in robo-taxi service.
Yeah.
And that these vehicles can be without a driver at all, fully driverless.
That sounds great.
Well, it's great in a way. Yeah, maybe if the driving is actually good. But oh, all those Tesla accidents make me wonder.
Yeah, I saw a video of a guy like testing out the new Tesla auto driving, and it was not reassuring. It got confused at the crosswalks, confused at the lanes, and it was not like it was in fact not as good as the average driver.
Yeah, I mean, average driver who is distracted on texting, doing something on their cell phone is of course a greater menace than AV, but otherwise I have my doubts.
Yeah, I'm afraid
That's just me. I'm very suspicious of technology, so.
Yeah, maybe I'll let other people ride these things for a while. They can do the beta testing.
Well, I think that's probably the safest place to be. In the case of Cruise, their vehicles are only permitted to go up to 30 miles per hour. So not that fast to be in a car accident if you're inside. But if you're outside, say as a pedestrian or a cyclist, then that's bad news.
I wonder if it detects whether you put on your seatbelt. I would hope so.
Yes, definitely.
All right. Well, good. Well, that's it for this one. And we will be back on Tuesday. Let me find my button. There it is.